They tried every dish. None worked. From world-class chefs to private cooks, every plate was rejected. Every bite refused. The CEO's daughter, once full of laughter, wouldn't eat a thing. No matter what they served, she simply shook her head. Until one day, one quiet girl stepped forward. She wasn't a famous chef. She wasn't even supposed to cook that day. But what happened next left everyone speechless. Her dish, simple, humble, and full of heart, was the only one the little girl accepted. And what came after that moment changed not just a meal, but an entire family. In this video, you'll see how one act of sincerity turned rejection into connection and pride into humility. Stay till the end to uncover the powerful truth behind why this one meal mattered so much. Before we talk about the girl who changed everything, we need to talk about the world she stepped into. A world built on glass walls, marble floors, and silence that echoed wealth. The kind of silence that comes from comfort, not peace. In the heart of the city stood the CEO's mansion, grand, imposing, but strangely cold. Every corner was polished, every room perfectly arranged, yet something about it felt distant, almost untouched by warmth. It was a home filled with everything money could buy, and missing everything it couldn't. The CEO was known as a man of precision, disciplined, respected, feared. He built his empire from nothing, and his mansion was proof of it. But behind those tall gates and glittering chandeliers lived a family that seemed disconnected, especially his daughter, a fragile soul hidden behind quiet eyes and a stubborn silence. Before we talk about the chaos that followed, imagine the mansion's dining room, long enough to host 20 people, shining with crystal lights that reflected off silver cutlery. At the head of that table sat the little girl, no older than 8, her plate untouched. Around her, chefs and staff moved nervously, trying to please her. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, it was always the same. The best chefs from the city came with confidence and left with confusion. One morning, a French chef flew in just to prepare her favorite dish, or at least what her mother thought was her favorite. The kitchen buzzed like a factory. Pans clanged, knives danced, spices filled the air. The plate was prepared with perfection. But when it reached her, she simply took one bite, frowned slightly, and pushed it away. The staff froze. Her mother's smile faded. The chef tried to explain, maybe the flavor was too strong, maybe the salt wasn't balanced, but it didn't matter. The meal was rejected. Before we talk about what that rejection meant, picture the next day, the same long table, the same silence. Another chef, another dish, another failure. The CEO's patience began to thin. He wasn't a man used to know. He dealt in control and efficiency. So when his daughter refused to eat, he saw it not as sadness, but defiance. He called for nutritionists, child psychologists, even doctors. They said she was fine physically. She just didn't want to eat. Maybe she's bored, one suggested. So he hired entertainers to make mealtime fun. The little girl laughed for a moment, but when the food came, her laughter faded again. Before we talk about how this affected the house, think of the atmosphere that grew over time. The kitchen turned into a battlefield, not of knives and flames, but of pride and panic. Every cook wanted to be the one who succeeded. Every failure felt heavier than the last. Plates kept going to waste. Ingredients that could have fed dozens were thrown away untouched. And in the middle of it all, the CEO's wife, elegant but weary, watched helplessly. She tried to comfort her husband, but his frustration was too deep. She has to eat something, he'd say, pacing the floor. What kind of father can't even feed his own child? Before we talk about the girl who would later change this story, notice the small cracks forming in this perfect family. The mansion began to feel like a cage. The laughter of guests faded. The daughter's silence spread like fog. Even the staff spoke in whispers now, careful not to disturb the tension. The head chef, a proud man with decades of experience, tried again and again. He studied her habits, the way she smelled the food before tasting it, the way her eyes lost interest after one bite. She doesn't reject the food, he told his team quietly one day. She rejects something else, something we can't see. But no one knew what that was. Before we talk about the arrival of the quiet helper, let's look at how desperate things became. Weeks turned into months. The CEO's daughter lost weight. The doctors began to worry. Every attempt to please her only made the atmosphere heavier. The CEO canceled meetings just to sit by her side. Sometimes he tried feeding her himself. "Just one bite," he'd whisper gently. But she would look down, silent, refusing even that. In that house of success and luxury, no one dared to say it out loud, but everyone knew something was wrong. Before we talk about the new girl who watched all of this unfold, picture the kitchen on an ordinary afternoon. The sound of chopping, the rush of boiling water, the faint aroma of expensive ingredients. Yet beneath the surface, there was exhaustion, tired eyes, forced smiles, hopeless repetition. The chefs weren't cooking with passion anymore. They were cooking out of fear. A staff member once whispered, "It's like a curse. No one can please her." And in a way, that's how it felt. Before we talk about how things began to change, see how low the morale had fallen. The CEO had replaced almost every cook in the mansion. The staff changed frequently, unable to handle the pressure. Rumors spread outside that the little girl was spoiled, that she was difficult. But those who worked close to her knew the truth. She wasn't spoiled. She was hurting. The CEO's wife, once radiant and social, now spent her days in silence beside her daughter. The dining table, once full of conversation, became a place of quiet defeat. Meals turned into rituals of disappointment. Every plate brought hope and ended in heartbreak. Before we talk about the girl who would soon take her chance, we need to meet the version of the household that existed before her arrival. It was a place drowning in perfection. Spotless floors, shining dishes, and empty hearts. Every person knew their role but forgot their reason. The house had structure but no soul. The food had flavor but no feeling. And maybe that's what the little girl was rejecting all along. Not the meals, but the emptiness behind them. The head chef often stared at the dining hall through the kitchen window. He watched the daughter's small hands push away another plate. "It's not the food," he muttered one evening. "It's the feeling." But no one listened. Everyone was too busy proving themselves. Before we talk about the girl who understood that feeling, let's remember this moment, the night before she arrived. The CEO stood alone in the dining room, staring at another untouched plate. His reflection in the silver tray looked tired, defeated. His wife placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "She'll eat when she's ready," she whispered. But he didn't answer, because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about food anymore. It was about something deeper, something missing, something love could reach. But power couldn't. And somewhere, in a small corner of that very house, a quiet kitchen helper was washing dishes, unnoticed, listening to every conversation, seeing every disappointment, and feeling a strange pull in her heart. She didn't know why, but something about the little girl's sadness stayed with her. Before we talk about her, the one who would soon change everything, let's pause here, in that moment of tension. A home full of people, yet starved of connection. A table full of food, yet empty of warmth. No one knew it yet, but the answer they'd been searching for wasn't going to come from a recipe or a famous chef. It was going to come from someone no one even noticed. Someone whose hands worked quietly, whose heart remembered something everyone else had forgotten. The mansion was about to learn a lesson it could never buy. And it would all begin with the simplest act. A girl deciding to cook, not to impress, but to care. Before we talk about the girl who changed everything, we need to understand where it all began. A home so vast it felt more like a palace than a place to live. Marble floors, golden chandeliers, silent halls lined with paintings that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The family that lived here wasn't just rich, they were powerful. The father, a well-known CEO, ran one of the largest companies in the city. The mother was elegant, poised, and known for hosting events where everything from the cutlery to the conversation had to be flawless. And then there was their daughter, a small, fragile soul at the center of it all. Before we talk about the girl in the kitchen, we have to talk about this little one, the CEO's daughter, the only child of a man who had everything money could buy except peace. She was sweet, curious, and full of light once, but lately something had changed. Meals that once made her smile now made her frown. The laughter around the dinner table had faded into quiet tension. The cooks whispered in the kitchen, worried and confused. The CEO's wife tried every trick, new recipes, new chefs, new techniques, but the result was always the same: rejection. Before we talk about how everyone reacted, picture the daily routine in that house. Morning sunlight filtered through glass walls as the staff hurried about, cleaners polishing the floors, gardeners trimming hedges, chefs planning menus in the state-of-the-art kitchen. Every meal was planned like a royal feast. Imported ingredients, measured spices, perfectly plated dishes. Every plate was a piece of art. But when the little girl sat down to eat, her expression said it all. She simply didn't want it. Day after day, plate after plate, the same story unfolded. The moment she tasted something, her face turned blank. She would shake her head slowly, push the plate away, and retreat into silence. At first, everyone thought it was just a child's mood. Maybe she wanted something else. But weeks turned into months, and her refusal grew stronger. Even when hungry, she wouldn't eat. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She just quietly rejected everything placed before her. Before we talk about the frustration building inside the family, let's look at how hard everyone tried. The chefs came from the best restaurants in the country. One was trained in Paris, another in Tokyo, and one even claimed to have cooked for royalty. Each of them believed their skill could win her over. They prepared her favorite dishes, soft pastas, delicate soups, fancy desserts. They adjusted spices, textures, and flavors. But no matter what they tried, the result never changed. The daughter would take a single bite, look at her parents, and gently shake her head. The CEO, a man who controlled empires, couldn't control this one thing. He tried everything else money could offer. Nutritionists, doctors, even child therapists. They all said the same. She's healthy. She's fine. Maybe it's emotional. That answer frustrated him even more. He wasn't used to problems that didn't have logical solutions. Before we talk about how it affected the home, you should know that meals in that family were more than just food. They were symbols. They represented love, unity, and status.
This every evening.
The dining table became the heart of their world. A place where family met after long days apart. But now, that table had turned into a battlefield of disappointment. The mother's eyes showed helplessness. The father's tone grew sharper. The staff walked on eggshells. And the little girl, she just stared at her untouched plate, lost somewhere far away. The kitchen, once full of energy and laughter, had become a zone of fear. Each morning, the head chef gathered his team like soldiers before a war. "Today we'll get it right," he'd say, determined but tired. They experimented endlessly creamy sauces, subtle flavors, international recipes. But every attempt ended in failure. Dishes went untouched, food went cold, and hope slowly began to fade. Before we talk about the turning point, notice the change in tone across the house. Servants whispered that the mansion didn't feel alive anymore. The CEO spent more time at work to avoid the tension. The mother stopped inviting guests because she didn't want anyone to see her daughter's silence. Even the child's laughter, once echoing through the halls, was gone. The staff tried everything they could think of. One day, the pastry chef made a cake shaped like a fairy tale castle, thinking the colors and design might excite the child. But when the cake arrived, she looked at it for a moment, then quietly said, "It's pretty, but I don't want it." Her voice was soft, but heavy enough to break every heart in the room. The head chef grew restless. He couldn't understand it. He'd fed hundreds of people in his career, but this one little girl had defeated him completely. He started studying old recipes, ancient traditions, even homemade comfort foods, hoping something would connect. Nothing did. Before we talk about the girl who watched all this from the shadows, imagine the tension that now lived in every corner of that home. Every meal felt like a test. Every dish carried pressure. And with each failure, the frustration grew thicker. The CEO's wife stopped tasting food herself. She couldn't bear to see another rejection. The father, despite his stern face, looked tired. The child's sadness had started to echo inside him. In the servants' quarters, the helpers whispered about it constantly. Maybe the girl's cursed, some said. Maybe she's just stubborn, others guessed. But one quiet voice, belonging to a young helper in the kitchen, didn't say much. She simply watched. She observed every detail, the child's expressions, her reactions, her silence. She noticed things no one else did. Before we talk about her role, let's see how deep the desperation had gone. By now, the family had replaced chefs twice. They'd spent more money on food experiments than most people would in a lifetime. The CEO had even flown in ingredients from abroad, thinking maybe something exotic would help, but it didn't. The daughter's plate remained untouched. Each night ended the same way. A silent dinner, untouched plates being cleared away. and the faint sound of the child saying softly, "I don't like it." The cooks lowered their heads. The mother hid her tears. The father walked out to the balcony, staring into the dark. The mansion's glow couldn't hide its emptiness anymore. Chandeliers still shone, the floor still gleamed, but everything felt hollow. The warmth that once filled the family had vanished. Even the staff, once cheerful and proud, now worked with fear and exhaustion. Cooking had become a burden, not a joy. Before we talk about the girl's decision to step forward, we need to understand the hopelessness that filled the air. Nobody believed the problem could be solved anymore. They thought the child's rejection was permanent, a mystery without reason. The kitchen had become quiet. No one dared to speak loudly. Even laughter felt out of place. But in that silence, something was stirring. A young helper, unnoticed, unimportant, often sent to fetch water or clean the counters, began to wonder. She didn't understand fancy recipes. She didn't know about plating or international cuisines. But she knew about something else: care. She had seen how the child's eyes softened whenever someone spoke gently to her, or how she watched the raindrops fall outside the window during meals as if searching for comfort. She noticed the details that the professionals ignored. Before we talk about her next step, think about how small moments can carry big meanings. The helper began to feel something, not pride or ambition, but empathy. She saw a child who didn't need more flavor. She needed warmth. And even though she was the lowest-ranked person in the kitchen, she believed maybe, just maybe, she could make something that spoke to the girl's heart, not just her tongue. While the chefs debated and argued over ingredients, she stayed quiet, but inside her mind was forming an idea. Not of luxury, but of love. Not of perfection, but of simplicity. Before we talk about her dish, we have to leave this scene frozen for a moment, a house filled with silence. A family filled with worry, and a young helper standing in the corner, watching it all. No one knew it then. But the person who would finally bring peace back into that home wasn't a celebrity chef or a nutritionist. It was the quiet girl no one had ever really noticed, the one who didn't belong at the table, but would soon change what that table meant forever. Before we talk about what she cooked, we need to understand why she decided to cook at all. It wasn't her job. She wasn't a chef. She was the quiet helper, the one who stood in the corner, cleaning vegetables, wiping counters, and fetching whatever the real cooks needed. She had no reason to step forward, no right to interfere. But watching that little girl's sadness every day started to stir something inside her. She couldn't forget the way the child sat there, eyes empty, food untouched, as if she was quietly asking for something no one could name. And though everyone else saw a problem, the helper saw pain, a kind she somehow recognized. Before we talk about what she made, imagine her standing there one early morning, long before anyone else entered the kitchen. The air was still cool, the sunlight barely touching the marble counters. The kitchen was silent, a rare moment of peace before the day's chaos began. And in that stillness, she decided, I'll try. Not because she thought she was better, not because she wanted praise, but because she couldn't bear to see a child hurt anymore. Before we talk about her ingredients, let's step into her memory for a moment. She wasn't born into luxury. She grew up in a small, noisy neighborhood, a place where meals were simple but filled with laughter. She remembered her mother's voice, soft and calm, humming while stirring a pot of lentils. She remembered the warmth that filled their little kitchen, the scent of onions sizzling in oil, the way her mother always said food carries feelings. Cook with love, and even the simplest meal becomes special. That memory became her starting point. She didn't reach for imported ingredients or rare spices like the other chefs did. Instead, she walked to the small pantry, looked around quietly, and picked things no one had touched: a handful of rice, a few vegetables, some herbs from the garden. Everything simple, ordinary, forgotten. But to her, they were enough. Before we talk about how she cooked, let's see her mindset. She didn't rush. She didn't measure. She moved with intention, slow, deliberate, calm. Every motion had care behind it. When she washed the rice, she did it 3 times, just like her mother taught her. When she chopped vegetables, she hummed under her breath, the same tune her mother once sang. The kitchen began to smell different, not grand, not luxurious, but comforting. The kind of smell that feels like a memory. While the chefs used machines and timers, she used instinct. She knew when to stir just by the sound of the simmering pot. She knew when the heat was right by the rhythm of the bubbles. And every time she lifted the lid, steam carried with it something invisible, emotion. Before we talk about what the others thought, imagine how she must have looked small, quiet, focused. She didn't notice the head chef walking in, frowning as he saw her at the stove. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She froze for a moment, then softly said, "Just trying something small, sir." He wanted to scold her, but something in her tone stopped him. There was no arrogance, no defiance, just sincerity. He sighed and said, "Fine, but clean up after you're done." Then he left. She continued, unfazed. She didn't cook for approval. She cooked for meaning. Before we talk about the dish itself, let's look at the emotions behind it. Every time she stirred, she thought about the little girl, about how lonely she seemed, about the way her eyes looked like they were searching for home. She thought maybe she doesn't want food that shines. Maybe she wants food that feels like someone cares. So she added one last touch, a pinch of salt, a small drizzle of ghee, and something personal, a tradition from her village. Her mother used to make this exact dish whenever she or her siblings were sick. It wasn't just food, it was comfort in a bowl. She believed it could calm hearts as easily as it filled stomachs. Before we talk about what it looked like, think of how the kitchen felt in that moment. The clatter of pans had stopped. The usual chaos was replaced with quiet focus. Even the air felt softer. She didn't need music. The bubbling pot was enough. She didn't decorate the plate with fancy designs or microgreens. She served it simply warm, fresh, and honest. No gold flakes, no sauces, just the aroma of something real. Before we talk about how the dish reached the family, imagine her standing there, nervous yet calm, holding the plate with both hands. She didn't plan to serve it herself. She just placed it on the counter, stepped back, and whispered to the head cook, "Maybe let her try this." The others exchanged uncertain looks. "What is it?" someone asked. She hesitated before replying, "Just something from home." And in that moment, for the first time in that grand kitchen, someone had cooked not for pride, but for love. Before we talk about how the plate made its way to the dining room, let's pause here and feel what her actions meant. Every ingredient she used had purpose not to impress, but to express. The rice represented simplicity, the vegetables represented care, and the slow cooking represented patience. She didn't rely on luxury. She relied on feeling. And when she finally turned off the stove, she didn't sigh with relief or pride. She just smiled faintly, not because she knew it would succeed, but because it felt right. Before we talk about what happened next, look closer at her expression. There was something peaceful about it. She had done her best, quietly, with full heart. Whatever came next didn't matter to her. She'd already succeeded, not in feeding the child, but in remembering what food truly meant. While the other cooks debated textures and plating, she stood aside, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes fixed on the small bowl she'd made. She whispered softly to herself, "Please like it." Not as a prayer for approval, but as a wish for connection. Before we talk about the girl's reaction, remember this. The dish wasn't extraordinary in appearance. It didn't sparkle, didn't shine. It wasn't served on fine china or garnished with expensive herbs. It was just warm, simple, sincere. But sometimes, simplicity is exactly what the heart needs. As the helpers carried it out of the kitchen, she stood still, her hands clasped together, listening to the faint sound of footsteps fading toward the dining hall. She didn't know if it would be accepted. She didn't know if the family would even find out who made it. She didn't care. All she hoped for was that the little girl might finally smile. Before we talk about that moment of truth, remember how much of her heart she had poured into that bowl. Every motion, every choice, every memory had guided her not from skill, but from love. It wasn't just cooking. It was healing, quietly taking form in a pot of food no one expected to matter. And while the rest of the kitchen waited for results, she stood near the window, eyes on the morning light, lost in thoughts of her mother, her childhood, and that one simple rule she'd always been taught. If you cook with love, someone, somewhere will feel it. Before we move to the next moment, the one where everything changes, let's hold this image in our minds. A grand mansion, filled with the silence of failed perfection. And in its quiet corner, a young helper, hands trembling, but heart steady. Offering something pure and forgotten, a reminder that the smallest gestures can carry the deepest warmth. The dish was ready. The moment had arrived. And soon, the meaning behind it all would reveal itself. Before we talk about what changed in that house, we need to revisit that quiet moment, the one that no one expected would mean anything. The plate was placed before the little girl like every other meal had been, with careful presentation, polite silence, and hidden hope. The difference this time wasn't in the food's look, but in its feeling. It didn't glitter, didn't smoke dramatically, didn't shout for attention. It just sat there, humble, warm, waiting. The CEO's daughter glanced at it briefly. She didn't look excited. To her, it was just another dish in a long list of disappointments. The mother watched her anxiously. The father hid his frustration behind a stern face. And the chefs stood frozen at the back of the room, holding their breath. Before we talk about what happened next, imagine that silence, the kind that makes even a clock's ticking sound loud. The little girl picked up her spoon slowly. She took a tiny bite. Everyone's eyes followed her, a room full of people staring at a single child, waiting for her reaction. For a few seconds, nothing happened. She just sat there, chewing quietly. The mother's fingers tightened around her napkin. The father's jaw clenched. The chefs exchanged nervous glances. It was the same routine they'd seen 100 times before. Taste, pause, rejection. But then, something shifted. Before we talk about their reactions, focus on hers. The little girl stopped, closed her eyes for a moment, and then, for the first time in months, smiled. Not a forced smile. Not a polite one. A real smile. Soft, innocent, full of something everyone in that room had forgotten existed. Joy, the mother gasped quietly. The father leaned forward. "Do you like it?" he asked carefully. The little girl nodded slowly, her spoon still in her hand. "It tastes like home," she whispered. Those words, small and gentle, struck the air like thunder. Everyone froze. The head chef blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. The mother covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The father, a man known for power and control, suddenly looked lost, as if emotion had caught him completely off guard. Before we talk about how the room changed, notice the expression of the kitchen staff standing at the door. They had seen every failure, every rejection, every disappointment. But now, they were witnessing something entirely new. Hope. The little girl took another spoonful, then another. Mother leaned closer. "Sweetheart, what do you like about it?" The child smiled again. "It feels warm. Like when Grandma used to cook for me." Those words hit everyone like a truth they'd been missing all along. It wasn't about flavor, presentation, or skill. It was about comfort, the kind only sincerity can create. Before we talk about what happened afterward, picture the head chef. The same man who once dismissed the helper as inexperienced now stood silent, humbled. His pride, his confidence, all the training he'd received, none of it had reached the girl. But this simple, heartfelt dish had. And that realization left him speechless. He turned to his team and asked softly, "Who made this?" One of the assistants hesitated before answering. It was the helper. The chef frowned in confusion. "The helper, sir," the assistant said. "She made it this morning. Said she just wanted to try something small." The chef didn't move. For a moment, he couldn't process it. This wasn't supposed to happen. The helper wasn't even part of the cooking team. She didn't have the training, the experience, or the reputation. And yet she was the one who had succeeded where everyone else had failed. Before we talk about the family's reaction, imagine the moment when the truth reached them. The mother asked, "Who cooked this?" The chef hesitated. "Ma'am, it was the young helper." There was silence again, a different kind of silence this time. Not of tension, but disbelief. The CEO's wife looked surprised, the father's eyebrows raised. For a second, neither of them spoke, and the mother said quietly, "Call her." Before we talk about how she entered that room, picture her standing in the kitchen, her hands still slightly wet from washing dishes, unaware of what had just happened. When one of the cooks rushed in and said, "Madam wants to see you," her heart skipped. She thought she was in trouble. Maybe she'd overstepped. Maybe she'd broken some rule. She wiped her hands quickly and followed them to the dining room, her steps soft, her eyes lowered. When she entered, the atmosphere was unlike anything she'd ever felt. The entire family was looking at her. The little girl was still eating, still smiling, while her parents looked at the helper as though seeing her for the first time. Before we talk about what was said, feel that moment, the collision of two worlds, power and simplicity, wealth and humility, all standing face to face. The CEO's wife spoke first, her tone gentle. "You made this?" The helper nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. I just wanted to try something simple." The mother smiled through tears. "Simple," she repeated softly. "It's the only thing she's eaten in weeks." The helper's eyes widened. She didn't know what to say. She looked at the little girl, who looked back and smiled. "It's really good," the child said. "It feels happy." That single line melted every barrier in the room. The father stood up, walked over, and placed his hand on the helper's shoulder. "Thank you," he said quietly, a word he rarely used. Dude, what no one else could. Before we talk about what that meant for her, notice how the chefs reacted. They weren't angry. They weren't jealous. They were humbled. They understood now that cooking isn't about showing off. It's about connecting. The head chef approached her and said, "I've spent my whole life perfecting recipes, but you reminded me what cooking really means." She shook her head quickly. "No, sir, he interrupted gently. "No, you reminded us all." Before we talk about what happened next, take in the image. A room that had once been filled with tension, now overflowing with warmth. The little girl kept eating, the mother couldn't stop smiling, and even the father, usually stoic, let out a quiet sigh of relief. It was as if that one meal had broken an invisible wall, the one separating heart from habit, family from formality. The helper stood there, still shy, still unsure how to respond to the attention. But deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: belonging. Before we talk about how her place in the family changed, think about how perspective shifted that day. The CEO, who had once believed only money could solve problems, realized that some problems require something deeper: empathy. His wife saw that true care can come from the most unexpected hearts. The chef saw that humility was as important as skill. And the helper, she saw that even the smallest act, when done with love, can transform lives. From that day forward, the kitchen changed. The same chefs who once ignored her began to ask for her opinion. They wanted to understand how she'd done it, not the recipe, but the feeling. She couldn't explain it in technical terms. She just said softly, "I cooked what I'd cook for someone I care about." Before we talk about how the family treated her after that, imagine the little girl later that evening, still smiling, still talking about the meal. "Can she cook for me again tomorrow?" "Uh-huh," she asked. Her parents exchanged a glance, smiling. The mother nodded. Of course, and just like that, the helper became something more, not just a worker, but part of their circle, part of their peace. The staff noticed the change too. The air around the mansion felt lighter. The once distant family began to talk more, laugh more, and eat together without the heavy silence that had haunted them. The little girl would visit the kitchen now, something she'd never done before. She'd sit on a small stool beside the helper and watch her cook, asking endless questions. "Why do you stir slowly? Why do you smile when you taste it?" The helper would just laugh softly and say,
"Oh."
"'Cause food listens when you're kind to it." Before we talk about what this meant for the CEO himself, remember that this was more than a meal. It was a reminder. He began to realize how disconnected they'd all become, how much they'd tried to control perfection instead of feeling connection. He often found himself standing quietly at the kitchen door, watching his daughter laugh beside the helper. Those moments brought him something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The girl who once lived in the background now stood at the heart of the home, not because she sought recognition, but because sincerity naturally draws light. Before we talk about the next phase of her life, let's stay here in this moment of transformation. A mansion that once felt cold now glowed with warmth. A child who once rejected everything now found comfort. And a young woman who once went unnoticed became the quiet center of their world. The turning point wasn't loud. There was no applause, no celebration, just a smile. One small, genuine smile that changed everything. And from that day on, the house began to heal. Before we talk about what the family learned that day, Let's pause and reflect on how everything quietly changed after that one simple meal. The mansion didn't look any different from the outside. It was still grand. Silent, full of marble and luxury, but something within its walls had softened. The air felt lighter. People inside smiled more. The cold formality that once ruled every corner slowly began to fade. Before we talk about the meaning behind all this, notice how respect began to shift. In that house, respect used to flow in one direction, downward. From those who had power to those who served, the CEO spoke, others listened. The chefs prepared, others followed. The helper cleaned, and no one noticed. But now, after that one meal, something turned around. People began looking at her differently, not as the help, but as someone whose sincerity had touched the heart of the family. Before we talk about acceptance, imagine the small but powerful changes that began appearing in everyday life. The head chef, who once believed experience made him untouchable, now asked questions humbly. "How did you think of that combination?" he would ask her with genuine curiosity. The staff, who once ignored her presence, now smiled and greeted her with respect. Even the CEO's wife began visiting the kitchen more often, standing beside her asking softly, "Can you show me how you did that?" The helper never bragged. She never tried to take credit. She still worked quietly, still moved humbly, still carried the same grace that had drawn everyone to her without her realizing it. But now, when people looked at her, there was warmth in their eyes, not because of her status, but because of her spirit. Before we talk about humility, look at how the CEO himself changed. He was a man used to control meetings, schedules, decisions, but this event humbled him in a way that no business loss ever could. He began to understand that leadership wasn't about command, but connection. That even the smallest person in his home could teach him something valuable. And that realization didn't make him smaller, it made him greater. Before we talk about what the daughter learned, notice the quiet lessons in her behavior too. She stopped refusing food from others, but she always wanted the helper near, not because of flavor, because of comfort. When she sat beside the helper and watched her cook, she wasn't just eating a meal, she was feeling love, safety, and care. For a child, that was everything. The helper's care reminded her of the grandmother she'd lost, the one who used to cook slowly, humming softly, never rushing, never scolding. It wasn't about taste, it was about the heart behind it. Before we talk about pride, let's understand how this story became a mirror for everyone in that mansion. The chefs realized that pride doesn't feed souls, it feeds ego.
Ow.
Their dishes had been technically perfect, but emotionally empty. The helper's meal had been simple, even ordinary, but made with care, patience, and heart. That's what separated her from the rest. She didn't cook to impress, she cooked to comfort. And in a world that often measures value in skill, wealth, and appearance, she reminded them all that sincerity still has power. Before we talk about the family's transformation, notice the ripple effect that one act of sincerity created. The CEO began to treat his staff differently, started thanking them, listening to them. He even told the head chef, "It's not the size of your title that defines your worth, it's the size of your heart." Those words echoed through the household, changing the tone of how people interacted. The mother, who had once been distant in her grief over her daughter's rejection of food, began to smile again. She started spending time in the kitchen, not to oversee, but to participate. She'd watch the helper cook, sometimes offering to stir or chop vegetables. It wasn't about learning recipes, it was about reconnecting to something she'd forgotten, the comfort of care. Before we talk about how respect deepened, think about the nights that followed. When the family sat together for dinner now, there was laughter. The little girl would tell stories about her day. The CEO would listen, sometimes even joke. The mother would smile softly, her eyes glowing with gratitude. And in the background, the helper would serve quietly, content just to see them happy. For the first time in years, that house felt like a home. Before we talk about what the helper felt, picture her alone in the kitchen late at night, cleaning up after dinner. She wasn't thinking of fame or favor, just peace. She felt thankful that her small act had brought warmth to others. For her, that was enough. She didn't need applause. She didn't crave recognition. Her satisfaction came from knowing she had done something with sincerity and that it had mattered. Before we talk about the deeper meaning, Imagine how that sincerity began to influence even the little girl's outlook. She'd ask questions like, "Why do you smile when you cook?" And the helper would answer softly, "Because food carries emotion. If you're angry, it knows. If you're gentle, it knows." Those words stayed with the child. They shaped the way she'd grow up, the way she'd treat people. Long after that moment, she'd remember not the meal itself, but the kindness behind it. Before we talk about contrast, notice how pride used to rule that mansion. Pride in wealth, in titles, in skills. But all that pride had created distance. It had built walls instead of bridges. The helper's simplicity broke those walls. Her humility reminded them that true value isn't in how high you stand, but how deeply you care. The CEO once said in a meeting, "We can buy everything except peace, but at home." He found that peace in something money could never purchase: sincerity. Before we talk about the lasting impact, let's look at how even the staff began to carry this new spirit. They no longer worked out of fear or pressure, but pride, the good kind. The kind that comes from belonging to something kind, respectful, and real. And at the center of it all was the helper, still quiet, still gentle, still unaware of the depth of her influence. She had become a symbol not of power, but of heart. Her presence reminded everyone that sometimes the answers we seek in grand gestures are hidden in simple acts of care. Before we talk about what changed in her life, understand the deeper transformation, not in her surroundings, but in others' hearts. The family learned to value people for who they are, not what they bring. The chefs learned that humility gives meaning to mastery. The daughter learned that love can be tasted, not just felt. The helper learned that being unseen doesn't mean being insignificant. Before we talk about what makes this story unforgettable, remember this. The mansion didn't need a new chef, new recipes, or new rules. It needed heart. And once it found that through the quiet hands of a humble girl, everything else began to make sense. She had reminded them of something ancient and human, that sincerity carries power, can melt pride, heal division, and bridge the gap between hearts that have forgotten how to connect. Before we talk about what others called her later, the girl who changed the house, understand that she never saw herself that way. She never spoke of what happened. She never told the story. She just continued to cook, to care, and to bring warmth to every plate she served. To her, it wasn't magic. It was love in motion. Before we talk about how this story spread beyond those walls, think about how timeless its message is. Everywhere in every life, there are people overlooked, the ones who work quietly, who care deeply, who give their best without expecting praise. They're the ones who keep the world gentle. In this story, the girl, the dish, the smile is a reminder that their quiet sincerity holds more power than any title ever could. Before we talk about the meaning one last time, let's feel the contrast one more time. Between pride and heart, perfection and peace, wealth and warmth. Pride demands recognition. Heart gives without asking. Pride wants to be right. Heart wants to make things right. And that day in that mansion, heart finally won. It wasn't through competition or command. It was through one small act of genuine care, proof that sincerity, though silent, never goes unnoticed. Before we talk about what this story means for us, let's take a moment to step away from that grand mansion and look a little closer at our own lives. Think about the times when someone did something small for you, something simple, a word of comfort, a cup of tea on a hard day, a smile when you were feeling unseen. It wasn't grand, wasn't expensive, but for some reason, you still remember it. Before we talk about the message of kindness, remember how those moments felt. You might have forgotten the face, but not the feeling. The warmth that lingered when someone treated you with genuine care. The calm that followed when someone took a second to listen. It's strange how those tiny gestures carry such lasting weight, how they stay quietly tucked in the corners of our hearts, long after the noise of the world fades away. Before we talk about the little girl's smile, think about how many of us have been in her place, surrounded by noise, by expectations, by things that should make us happy, yet something feels missing. And sometimes, it isn't another gift or luxury that fills that space. It's something human, small, unspoken act of love that doesn't demand attention. The CEO's daughter didn't need another dish made by expensive chefs. She needed connection. And when the helper cooked for her, She felt it, that invisible thread of sincerity that told her, "You're safe, you're cared for, you matter." Before we talk about empathy, think about how powerful that feeling is. It doesn't shout. It doesn't compete. It simply reaches out. And when it does, even the hardest hearts soften. Maybe you've been on the other side, the one giving, not receiving. Maybe you've helped someone quietly, without expecting anything back. A kind message, a ride home in the rain, a meal shared with someone who needed it. You didn't do it for recognition, you did it because it felt right. And somehow those moments end up shaping who we are more than any success ever could. Before we talk about hope, think about the times you felt unseen, when your effort went unnoticed, your words unheard. Maybe you felt like that helper, working in the background, doing your best while others took the spotlight. But then, maybe one day someone noticed, someone appreciated. And even if they didn't, the universe did, because kindness always finds its way back, even when no one's watching. Before we talk about justice, look at how balance finds its place in life. In that mansion, power once sat at the top. Wealth, status, pride. But when heart entered the story, everything leveled out. For the first time, those with power bowed to sincerity. And it felt right, because kindness has a quiet justice of its own. See, the helper didn't fight for attention. She didn't demand respect. She earned it through pure intention. That's the kind of justice the world rarely celebrates, but always remembers. Before we talk about the emotions this story awakens, think about your own world. The people who make life softer without you realizing it. Maybe it's a friend who checks on you even when they're busy. Maybe it's a parent who sacrifices quietly. Maybe it's a stranger who smiles at you when you least expect it. Those people are the reason we keep going. They remind us that even in a world obsessed with big things, it's the small, gentle acts that truly hold us together. Before we talk about the heart of this story, imagine how the CEO's family must have felt in that moment when the little girl smiled after so long. For months, they'd tried everything money could buy: nutritionists, imported ingredients, culinary experts, but none of that could reach her heart. And then, one humble meal did. That moment wasn't just about food. It was about love finally finding a way through. Before we talk about what made that moment powerful, let's explore something deeper. The reason we cry at stories like this. It's not just because they're emotional. It's because they remind us of something true, something we already know, but forget amid the noise of life, that love doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to be grand. And sincerity, though often invisible, leaves the deepest mark. Before we talk about how this story mirrors real life, think about the quiet heroes around us. Teachers who stay late to help one student understand. Nurses who comfort patients through long nights. Neighbors who bring food to someone who's alone. They don't appear on screens or headlines, but their impact ripples quietly through countless lives. The helper in the story is all of them. She's the symbol of every person who chooses care over pride, action over words, heart over recognition. Before we talk about what makes her act unforgettable, picture her again in that kitchen, humble, silent, pouring her heart into something simple. She didn't know it would change lives. She didn't know anyone would even notice, but she did it anyway. That's what makes it powerful, the purity of doing good without knowing the outcome. Before we talk about how viewers might feel watching this, think about the emotion that lingers after hearing it. It's not sadness. It's not joy. It's something in between, that soft ache we feel when goodness touches us. A reminder that love, even in small doses, still exists. Before we talk about the hope this story leaves behind, let's see how it mirrors our world today. A world where people often feel unseen, where kindness is mistaken for weakness, and where noise often drowns out compassion. But then a story like this comes along, quiet yet powerful, whispering, "Look, goodness still wins." And maybe that's what makes it resonate so deeply. It restores our belief that the simple, genuine parts of humanity still matter. Before we talk about the daughter's quiet smile, let's reflect on how it became more than a gesture. It was forgiveness. It was connection. It was a bridge between worlds, one built on care, not power. Her smile said what words couldn't: "I feel loved." Before we talk about the helper's emotion, imagine her hearing that the child had eaten. She didn't cheer or cry. She simply closed her eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you." That gratitude wasn't for recognition. It was for the chance to give. Because giving to people like her is its own reward. Before we talk about the story's emotional weight, realize how rare it is in today's fast, competitive world. We're surrounded by people chasing success, approval, perfection, yet what we crave most is warmth. We want someone to understand, not fix. To care, not compare. To simply be there, meant. And that's what this story captures. The timeless truth that hearts remember kindness longer than they remember victory. Before we talk about empathy one more time, ask yourself, when was the last time you showed kindness? Not for reward, but for connection. Maybe it was something small, so small you've already forgotten, but the person who received it, they might still remember. Because when you give from the heart, it leaves an imprint, invisible but permanent. Before we talk about how it all ties together, think of how this story travels beyond class, wealth, or culture. Everyone, from the richest home to the humblest village, understands care. Everyone needs it. And no matter where you come from, the heart speaks the same language. The helper didn't use words. Her kindness was her voice. Her cooking was her way of saying, "You are loved, you are not alone." And that's something everyone, everywhere, can feel. Before we talk about the meaning that lingers after the story ends, realize this. It's not really about food or wealth or status. It's about the quiet human moments that restore our faith in each other. Moments when someone chooses to give, even when they have little. Moments when a small act softens something big. Moments when love wins, not loudly, but gently. Before we talk about how viewers might carry this forward, imagine them sitting in silence after hearing the story. Maybe they remember their mother's cooking, or a teacher's patience, or a friend's kindness. Maybe they think about someone they hurt, or someone they should thank. And in that quiet reflection, the story does what it's meant to. It touches, heals, and reminds. Before we talk about the final part of this story, let's stay in this feeling for a moment, that soft glow of empathy, that quiet ache of remembering goodness. Because that's the true power of emotional resonance. It doesn't demand applause. It simply stays, like warmth in the chest, like peace after tears, like the echo of a melody you can't forget. And somewhere, deep down, we realize maybe it's not about the grand gestures at all. Maybe the world doesn't need more greatness. Yeah, maybe it just needs more genuine hearts like hers. Before we wrap up this story, think about what truly made the difference. It wasn't luxury, skill, or fame. It was heart. A simple act of sincerity can melt walls that power and pride never could. The girl's humble dish wasn't just food, it was love served quietly, and it changed everything. If this story touched you, don't forget to